We're going to be waiting a few minutes to start. Hi, welcome to the Back to School 2025 webinar from Advocates for Children. I'm Kim Madden from Advocates for Children. We're going to be doing some polls while we're waiting for people to come in. So if you could fill them out, that would be great. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. Okay, thank you so much for participating in our poll. I'm Kim Madden from Advocates for Children. Welcome to Back to School 2025. I'm joined today by Ross Baker, who's going to be answering questions. We do have a Q&A, a question and answer button on the bottom of the screen. So we will pause throughout for questions, but as questions come up, also feel free to enter them in there. So today I'm going to talk about Advocates for Children generally, go through some dates and updates this school year, talk about placement issues generally, which is always the most stressful for parents at this time of year. Also what to do if you're having issues with a student with an IEP, language access issues and English language learner programming, and also cover a little bit about suspensions. So Advocates for Children is an independent agency, and we protect the rights of all New York City students. We have a helpline that's available Monday to Thursday, 10 to 4. We have a lot of guides and resources available on our website. We offer workshops and trainings like this, and we do have limited free legal services to income eligible families. Our website has a lot of trainings, as I said, and a lot of materials. We also put updates on there. So if there's something new in the school system, you can find it there, as well as different information about our projects. We have a lot of webinars recorded, so you can go there and filter by the subject, the language. We have webinars in English and Spanish and a few other languages, and you can sort by different things to find what you need. So just to get into the first thing that's new every school year, of course, is when the first day of school is. The first day of school is a week from tomorrow on Thursday, September 4th. Some other dates to keep in mind are parent-teacher conferences. They start September 17th for elementary and pre-K. September 18th for middle schools and District 75, and September 25th for high school, as well as for schools that are kindergarten through 12th grade and 6th to 12th grade. In the beginning of the year, parent-teacher conferences are a great way to understand what your child's year will be like, find out who their teachers are. And we also do have a webinar and some materials on parent-teacher conferences on our website if you have questions about those. New rule this year, in case you haven't heard, the state so this is not a New York City rule, it's a New York State rule, has banned cell phones and devices in classrooms. This is something that they've talked about in the past a lot, but hasn't happened in a statewide way. Some schools already had this policy, so it may not be new for you, but if it is, one thing to know is that there's no devices allowed. A student can't have a device with them in school during the day. So it includes cell phones, which I think is the main thing they want to ban, but also tablets or laptops. And it does include during lunch and recess. It's not, you can't use your phone, you can't have your phone on you. Schools have to have a way to store the devices. That's up to each school. But they can be locked. They have to be in a locked storage. It can't be put your cell phone in your backpack. School issued devices are obviously okay. If they're giving you a laptop to work or a tablet to work, that's okay. You can use school provided technology for instructional activities. Also, there are, of course, some exceptions. If you have a medical or disability accommodation where you need to have a device, for example, if you have diabetes and you have a monitor that's connected to your cell phone, or you use a tablet to speak or to help you with schoolwork and it's on your IEP, you are allowed to have that with you. If you have caregiver responsibilities, so for students that are caregivers for younger siblings, for example, they have to have an exception approved by the school, but they can get an exception for that. And if there's something going on with the family, like a parent is sick or there's some concerns, they have to, there are exceptions. And so I think as this rolls out, we'll have more information and hope to do a training and some materials on this later this fall as we find out how this is, actually playing out in schools. But our understanding is they have to have an exception for a family emergency. What if students break the rules? This is the thing we're keeping the eye on the most. Schools are supposed to confiscate the cell phone, for example. It's the one we think is going to be most likely that students will keep on them, and let the family know. A student can't be suspended for using a cell phone, but if they refuse to turn it over or they get in a fight with the school safety officer about turning it over, then they can get suspended. So that's something to keep an eye on. They can't lower a student's grade because they had a cell phone. It's one thing if they said they were cheating or something, but they can't just lower grades, so it can't affect them academically. And then also, a school has to have a way for families and students to contact each other in case of emergencies. I think this is going to be school by school, and it's something to talk to your student about and your school about, and make sure that you both know how that's going to work. It may be, call the office or the parent coordinator, and you should raise any questions early. Obviously, when an emergency happens is not a good time to find out the number doesn't work or that person doesn't answer their phone. So I think a lot of these things we're going to see how this plays out in real life soon. Okay, another thing, this is not new, but it's something that I think the DOE is relying on more and more, is a New York City schools account. Also, you might hear this referred to as the parent portal. And it's a way for parents to get information about their students. Obviously, you have to have an ability to put this on your phone or laptop or a tablet. And you create an account. To create one, if a parent doesn't have one, you can follow directions on the DOE's website, but you do need a creation code from your school. Once you have that, you can keep signing in. And you'll find a lot of information about your student on that website. This is an example of what the website looks like. You can find out information about your child's IEP. You can't get the actual IEP document there, but you can find out programs and who related service providers are. The big one that they transitioned to only on this website recently or a couple years ago, was transportation. So it used to be, as a parent, I would get a letter mailed home in August telling me what my child's bus route was. Then it switched so that the only way you could find out what your child's bus route was to log into this portal or to call the school. And bus routes should be going up soon, if you don't already know. And then you can also see enrollment history. And this is helpful for parents, but also for professionals working with a student. The parent can allow you to have access, and you can look through and get the history of where they were at what school when. There's a lot of other information on here. The graduation tracker is on there. That's great to see how many credits you have left. Sorry, for high school students. I clicked on the wrong button there. Okay. So busing and transportation, probably the start of school year issue we get the most calls about every year. And I hope it's different this year, but we'll see. To find out about transportation, as I just mentioned, you need to be able to either call your child's school or log into New York City school's account to get the route and bus number. And the bus company is supposed to call you with the pickup time. If they don't call you, I would start calling them. You also want to look on there if you have a child with a disability who has accommodations on their IEP, make sure that it matches what's on the IEP. If your child has limited time travel, it should say that on there. If your child has a nurse or a para on the bus with them, it should say an extra seat. All of those things are really, really important. And to make sure it's on NICSA, that it's showing up there. First of all, it's on the IEP, that it's showing up in NICSA. And then when you talk to the bus company, confirm that they know. So that's really important. For example, my son used a wheelchair, and many years when I called the bus company, even though that was on his IEP and in the NICSA account, they wouldn't have a wheelchair accessible bus. They would get one, but they would have to change the route sometimes. So it's important to try to iron all the problems out ahead of time. But in case there are still problems, you can call OPT. OPT will tell you on the recorded line. I actually haven't called it yet this year, but it usually says, don't call us, call your school. You can call your school, and that's great. But a lot of times at this time of year, there's no one available. So for example, if you have an issue where the bus company is telling you they're not going to provide something your child needs, you should call OPT and you can file a complaint. Or if on the first day of school, the bus doesn't show up, let the school know. The school can file a complaint with OPT, but you can also call OPT. You want to get an incident number and write it down every single time. I know it's frustrating, but it's important to call and document every single day there's a problem. Or if there's a problem in the morning and a problem in the afternoon, document both of those. Because at least in our experience at Advocates for Children, if you have a few complaints on file, OPT is more likely to do something. Oh, sorry. Another thing that is new in the past couple of years is the New York City Schools Bus app. This is great. I spend a lot of time talking about what the DOE is doing wrong, but to be able to track your child's bus on an app is fabulous, in the same way that you can tell if you order an Uber or delivery, you can see where your food is or where your taxi is. Now you can see where your child is. And so that it's a really, really helpful thing for parents to know. So this is something that should be available, and many parents really liked it. All right, any questions so far? Okay. Ross, just speak up if you need me to answer anything that I missed, but otherwise I'll keep going. Okay, what if you have no placement? As I said, that's one of the most stressful things. And we have had a number of calls this year from especially students looking for District 75 placements in kindergarten who haven't gotten them. It's hard to tell if it's just we've had, a handful more, if it's anecdotal now, but, keeping an eye on what's going on out there and It's something that does happen, unfortunately. And sometimes it's that a parent just didn't get the placement letter. Sometimes it's that the DOE didn't issue a placement. So it's important to know that you do have rights and who to start calling now. If you're in grades K through 8, if your child's in grades K through 8, you can go to the zone school if you have one. And if not, go to your family welcome center. For high school, I would go to the Family Welcome Center. There's only a couple of zoned high schools. And we'll be sending out these slides to everyone as long as we have your email address. And you can go online to these links once you get the slides and see where the Family Welcome Centers are. If you have no placement for a preschool child with an IEP, if it's related services only or a general education placement, you can call the Office of Enrollment or email them. And for a special class placement, you can contact the CPSC where you live. And that CPSC in blue with the underline is a hyperlink to the CPSC locations and contact information. So we'll be sharing that as well. For no placement K to 12 for a student with an IEP, obviously I just talked about you can go to zone schools and family welcome centers. For most students going into kindergarten, 5th grade, and high school in District 1 through 32, you will have gone through the admissions process. One thing to know is the wait lists are still live, so you could still change. And if you're unhappy with the school placement, that's something you could check out now on the portal you use to apply to school. Also, you should know that there are some specialized programs. We'll cover that in the section on IEPs. And of course, for District 75 students, you should have gotten a prior written notice and school location letter. If you didn't, you can email District 75 placement or contact this number here and the special ed office and ask for a District 75 placement. One thing that we get calls about every year and throughout the year, it's really important to find out if you were matched with a school, for example, to make sure that the school can provide the program that's on your child's IEP and the services that are on there. You should not agree to change your child's IEP unless you think it's right for your child. So for example, if your child has a recommendation for a small class and the school says, we don't do that here, we have ICT, you only want to agree to that if you think your child could do well in an ICT and you think this school is really where you want to be. If not, you can ask that they create a small class. You could ask for additional support, for example, sets with an ICT, or you could ask for a school that can provide the small class. You do not have to agree to change the IEP. And that's something that we get calls about every year from parents who are being told by schools that, they can't provide what's on the IEP and the only option is to change the IEP. There's pretty strong guidance in DOE central documents that schools should not be doing this, but it is unfortunately still something we hear about. Okay, speaking of IEPs, IEP issues, which come up every year. The first one is, let's say you don't think the IEP has what your child needs. So the IEP, doesn't provide enough support. Let's say you have an ICT, but you think your child needs a small class. First, you want to get all the documents and the proof of what supports the IEP change. You don't always have to have a new evaluation, although that's very helpful. It depends on what the change is. You might need one. But other evidence could support it. Evidence that your child is not doing well over the years, that they haven't made progress, comments from teachers about them needing more help. Whatever it is, putting it together and making sure that you're making out a strong case for why you need something different. You want to ask for an IEP meeting in writing. It can be in an email, but make sure you're clear on what you want at that IEP meeting. At the IEP meeting, you want to, if you have people who are supporting you, a therapist who's working with your child or an evaluator or, whoever it is, somebody that can help support your request for different services, whether it's more services or less services, bring them to the meeting. You want to take notes and ask for the program pages to be filled out. Make sure you get a copy of the finalized IEP. And if you need to, go up the chain. So we do have presentations that focus entirely on special education and how to advocate for your child. But this is just a really quick overview for what to do if you're having problems. Also, one thing I think that's important to know is to know about, let's say you don't think your child is getting what they need, but then what does the DOE have available? It's important to educate yourself as much as possible about that. And I do think one area that the DOE has expanded a lot in the past decade really is increasing specialized programs for students with IEPs.
Hey,
So
Kim,
yeah,
sorry to stop you real quick. Just before we get into the next part, there's a question
sure.
that we got that I think might be helpful to answer live. So the
Okay.
question is, can I find out my child's route by contacting OPT? I'm a new resident, and the school tells me that the account creation code for the NICSA won't be available until the first day of school, so I'm unable to check beforehand on NICSA.
So that's really frustrating. And I have not had that question before. I would say ask the school what the route is. OPT will not give you the route. It's really frustrating, but they won't. At least that's my understanding. I think a parent can explain to them the issue about NICSA, and go up, maybe call the special education if that's the situation, if they have an IEP, or try calling. I'm not even sure who you call about it in that situation exactly, the Family Welcome Center. Maybe I would call the superintendent's office, trying to get a NICSA code ahead of time, but also at this point, asking about the bus route and making sure that there aren't any other delays. Because that's a really interesting question, and I'll ask people and see if anybody has any other has any other information about that. The school is supposed to have a transportation liaison who you can talk to and find out. If they don't, I would go to the superintendent's office and really push so you can get the information. The bus company also should be contacting the parent, but typically that won't happen until next week. And for a parent that's concerned about it and new to a school, that might feel a little bit late. Okay. Thanks, Russ. Uh, so specialized programs, bilingual ICT or special class, they've expanded these. There's still a huge need for them. But for students who have disabilities and need language supports, there are programs that you can go to outside of the application process, and there's a centralized office that helps coordinate them. That's actually the one thing with all of these schools, is that there's it's not done through the typical application process. It's something where there's someone at DOE central offices that's helping out families who need these programs. There's a lot more ASD, autism spectrum disorder programs, NEST, Horizon, AIMS, for example. So across the range of support needs with students with autism, there are specialized programs. And you apply for that separately on the DOE website. ACEs is the same idea, except for students with intellectual disabilities. Barrier-free schools, these are for students who can't, get into the school at a school that has steps, for example, who need a ramp, who need an elevator. As you may know, many New York City DOE schools are not accessible. So the DOE has to help families who need this. And although they're not required to provide a barrier-free site to a parent who uses a wheelchair, for example, they often will try to help. So there is an office that you can contact about that. And there's information online about which schools are accessible and how accessible. So some schools you may be able to get into the first floor, where people go to vote, for example, but you can't get to the higher level floors, or there's no accessible bathroom. Obviously, that's not going to work for a student who uses a wheelchair and needs an accessible bathroom. There's also expanded literacy programs, and they do keep adding to these. So certainly I would suggest checking on the New York City Public Schools website and look under the specialized programs. There's a link there. So what happens if, you get the right program, the related services, everything looks good on the IEP, but you get to the school and they say they don't have it, or you're not sure if they have it. First of all, finding out if a school has it is sometimes a problem. You should always ask the school if they can provide what's on the IEP. You can research what a school has. I know I mentioned this earlier, but all schools are supposed to provide program and services on an IEP, but a student doesn't have a right to an individual school. On the other hand, they do have a right to have their IEP program and services in place from the beginning of the school year. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And one thing that comes up is, how do I know if I have related services, for example? And that's a really good question. You have to just ask. One thing you can look on if you do have access to NICSA is they will eventually have the name. It's blacked out here because this is from a student's IEP, but you can see the provider's name. And this was for a student, this is old at this point, but where you can see the last documented service that was entered. And it's important so that you can find out who's providing the services. We have heard of a number of students who are not getting related services. We have a webinar on that, and you can certainly call our helpline for help. So that's an important thing to know. One thing that I just learned about yesterday is that if you don't have a related service provider, you get an RSA, or related service authorization. The DOE has raised the rates. It used to be $90 an hour for most related services, a little bit more for some and less for others. And they've raised them now to $108. We'll see if that's enough because they have not raised them in years, but they did raise them this year for the first time in a long, long time. Another way you can find out if a school has, an ICT class or a small class is on, this is really digging. So these are for the parents that really want to research and hone in on things. There's a website, on the DOE website, there's a report called Class Size Report. You could even just Google that, and you can click on detailed school level data. It opens up an Excel sheet. It's huge, so I don't recommend doing this on your phone if you can, because it's, a lot of rows and charts. But you can see, for example, this is a high school that has a number of ICTs. They have English in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I can't tell from this because I can't scroll down, but they may not have small class. So if your child needs a 15-to-1 in high school, this might be a place to look. This is typically, at this point in time, it's what happened last year, but it's a good starting place to see. Finally, you can look on the school quality reports. This is also digging way into the weeds, but you look up your school, you click on supportive environment, which is not what I would have thought of as the first place to look. And you can see what percentage of students are receiving their recommended programs. So for example, this is a high school, New York City iSchool. This is from a few years ago, but only 46% were receiving their programs in full. So that's pretty low. And if you had a child at that school with an ICT or a small class program, you would probably want to be asking some questions about that. On the other hand, it looks like they were doing pretty good with related services. So you want to ask questions and see. And this is a way to just check if you're not getting clear answers from the school. So makeup services and vouchers. There's many times that schools say, okay, well, we have an occupational therapist for your child, but they're on leave starting in October and they won't be back till January. Or you just transferred to this school, we don't have anybody available, we'll put you on a list. That's not supposed to happen. But if it does and they don't have a therapist, you're entitled to get a related service authorization. a voucher. And as I said, this is something where they did just raise the rates. I'm not sure if it's enough, but if it is, you can reach out to anybody that has that state license. So they have to be licensed in New York State. They have to go through a system of getting fingerprinted and approved, but then they could use that voucher to provide related services to your child. The same thing is true for SETS, Special Education Teacher Support Services, where provider has to be licensed as a special education teacher. This rate did go up, so it went up from a really low rate of $47.50 to $89. But from what I've heard, you can often get it increased to $125. And if you find somebody that charges more, and you can't find anyone else, you could go through a hearing, which is I'm not saying that's easy, but there are processes in place to try to get supports. And finally, if your child has a small class, so this is only for small class, it's not for ICT or a child who's getting related services only. But if you have a small class on your child's IEP and they don't provide it by a certain timeline, you could get something called a Nickerson letter or a P1 letter. And this is a voucher for a non-public school. You have to be accepted by a non-public school that can meet your child's IEP, the classification, and a program that's similar. So that's not always so easy, but we do have parents, especially this time of year, who don't have placements, who are able to get P1s, who can use this voucher. It's good for 1 year. Sometimes it can get renewed. And obviously you want your child to be in school. So this can be a way to get a different school. For all of these, you want to check the expiration dates and check the details on it. Do they have the right number of sessions, etc. Okay, and let's say there's still problems, you need an increased rate or you want a public school placement and they're not giving you one. The first thing to do is to start with the school. The parent coordinator and the principal should be helping you. If you're not able to get help from them, you can go to the district superintendent's office, the family support coordinator, or I learned the other day, I think there's a new acronym, it's like an FLC, family liaison coordinator. In any event, I think if you call the superintendent's office as a parent or a professional and say you're looking for help, they should connect you with the right place. There's family support coordinators and district family advocates, but I think there may be a different title now. But it's basically somebody who's public facing at the superintendent's office to help. You can also, and I would encourage you to contact central offices and email this specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov email, and sometimes you can get help there. Finally, for more specific issues for related services, there's an email for related services here for kindergarten IEPs. We should have changed this slide. It really is the kindergarten IEP process. That's the new email that's being used. They used to refer to kindergarten IEP process as turning 5. They changed that, which I fully support because a lot of kids are turning 6. They're already 5, but whatever. But it is hard to, for those of us who've been doing this for a while, to change the name in our heads. Special ed at charter schools, which can be complex. You want to, and you need help, you want to reach out to the CSE chairperson, the Committee on Special Education. And finally, if you want a specialized program or having issues with a specialized program, you can email specializedprograms@schools.nyc.gov. Finally, call AFC's helpline if you need help. And we're happy to try to provide the information that we can. Sometimes we can go up the chain at the DOE for parents. If you're not getting related services at your child's school and they're telling you, absolutely, we don't have anybody, too bad, you're on a wait list. Sorry. You can, and you contact related services and they don't answer, feel free to reach out to AFC's helpline. If you need a placement and you haven't gotten one, that's something that we sometimes can help with without having to file a hearing. But if you end up needing to do more formal dispute resolution, there are 3 paths you can do. You can file for mediation. which is a voluntary hearing. I'm sorry, voluntary meeting. And it's a mediator that leads it and tries to resolve the issue. Everyone has to agree, so the school has to agree, and you can still go to an impartial hearing. Mediation can be especially helpful if you want your child to stay at a school and it's a situation where it's just nobody is connecting. You're having a trouble with the principal. Sometimes that can help. Often, though, you might need an impartial hearing. You need a private school. You want more money for related services or a SETS voucher. You may have to file an impartial hearing. That's something that's a legal proceeding. There's an impartial hearing officer in charge. There's a written decision, and you can appeal it. Finally, you can file a complaint with the state education department. This can be helpful for something where it's clearly a violation. Your child is in an ICT class, but that's supposed to be a special ed teacher and a gen ed teacher, and there's just one teacher, and that's true for the whole school. Or there's other issues where people have gone to state ed and it can work. Keep in mind you're not in control when you file a state education complaint. It's the state education department that investigates. So that's something that sometimes you want to, what the problem is, but you have a specific solution in mind. You may want to do one of the other two options instead. Okay, any questions that have come up so far, Russ?
Nothing new just yet.
Okay. So language access rights. Parents have a right to get documents translated, including report cards, IEPs. They have a right to interpretation services and professional interpretation services, like we have Marley today. You have a right to a professional interpreter. They can't just tell you to bring your older child in, for example. And they should provide an interpreter at school meetings and events. There's these DOE languages that they have to provide translation and interpretation in. They did add 3 new languages, which is wonderful. Albanian, Uzbek, and Ukrainian they added, which is wonderful. If you have problems with translation or interpretation, and parents often do, you can email hello@schools.nyc.gov or call a complaint line. And sometimes the school just needs help getting the resources. So they don't know how to do it, and going up the chain can help make sure, that a parent does have information provided in their language. And it's really important because this system is complicated enough if you speak English, and if you're not understanding what is being said, it adds a whole other layer. For English language learners, so for students that are learning English, they have to be enrolled in one of these 3 programs if they're not able to pass a test showing that they're proficient in English. Oops, sorry. English as a new language, transitional bilingual education or TBE, or dual language. So those are the 3 options, and schools should be talking with you about what they have and what's best for your child, and you have a right to request which one you think would be the best for you. Multilingual learners with IEPs, I know I talked about this a bit earlier, but they do have bilingual special education classes. They're very limited. They are expanding a little bit, so they just added, I think, another Spanish high school small class, for example. If they don't have a bilingual special education program that your child needs, you can ask for and should get something called an alternate placement para, which is someone that can speak your child's language and help them access the materials in school. Obviously, that's not as ideal as being in a bilingual class where the teacher speaks your child's language, but it's still better than being in a monolingual class. For help, I certainly would encourage people to email the Bilingual Special Education Programs Office. This is a subset of the specialized programs, and ask for help. And for older ELs, there are schools, transfer schools and international high schools. And there's some things with transferring credits from other countries. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Finally, oh, actually, I think we have one slide after this. For students in temporary housing, they do have some extra rights. You have a right if a child is is in a shelter, they have a right to travel back to the school they were in before. Obviously, being in a temporary housing situation is stressful enough for a child, and the school system tries to ensure that they have a right to continuity in their last school. They also, if they want to be closer to where they're staying now, they do have a right to immediate enrollment in a closer school. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. They have a right to transportation. They do have a right to some services, students in temporary housing services. And finally, there is a school-based liaison that's supposed to help students in temporary housing. We do have a project that focuses exclusively on trying to help students in temporary housing. So you can reach out to this number or email projectlit@afcnyc.org. And then also on this slide, that regional manager thing is a link to the liaisons for students in temporary housing. Okay, finally, if your child is suspended, and this is something that we try to put into almost every training because no one plans to have their child suspended. And when it happens, you have to think quick in a stressful situation. Some really important things to keep in mind is the notice has to be in writing. They can't just suspend your child and tell you about it orally. They can't tell you your child can't come to school. Your child has a right to go to a school. Principal suspensions, you have a right to ask for a conference where they'll talk to you about the situation and you can ask for information and advocate for your child. For superintendent suspensions, you have a right to get a packet, and that's really important. We have so many calls in our helpline where the first thing we're talking parents through is go get the packet. The packet is a set of written documents that goes through the charges, the witnesses, what they're seeking, what happened. And that's really, really important. You can decide a few different things as to what to do if your child is facing suspension hearings. And we do have trainings and materials on that. But these are the things to keep in mind. Finally, if you remember one thing about this, call AFC. We can help when you're in this situation and try to help you sort through what information you might still need to get and what rights you have so that you can make the best decision for your child. Okay. Finally, we'd like to have you do a survey about things. And I know I keep saying this throughout, but you can call our helpline or also email us, or on our website. There's a way to contact AFC filling out a form. So thank you so much. Here's an exit survey. These are really, really helpful for us. So please, please, please fill it out. And if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Yeah, there's one in the chat that I
Okay,
want you to answer live if possible, if you want to
sure.
take a look at it.
Yep. Let me see if I can get that up. Actually, Ross, can you read it? I'm having trouble. I don't know why I can't seem to access it over my thing.
Yeah, no worries. So, will the DOE automatically honor an IEP from a different New York State school district until the DOE develops a new IEP for the student? Or will there be an interim or temporary IEP developed pending new evaluations?
That is such a good question, and I feel like I am not the expert on out of district transfers. And the wrinkle that makes it more complicated is the New York State IEP. If you're moving from a different state, you have a right to a comparable services program, and it's supposed to be similar. If you're moving from a different state, I mean, from the same state, I think they would have to do it. And in any event, it would seem like a pretty tricky argument that they don't have to do that. I think it would depend on the circumstances a little bit. And certainly it's something where if you're not getting the answer, and I'm sure if you're asking it, you're not, I would go to the superintendent's office. It's a situation where often we hear family welcome centers not giving the correct information. You may also want to go straight to special education at schools.nyc.gov and ask for help, and take it from there. Obviously, if you went to Rochester, New York, with your New York City IEP that recommended a specialized New York City program, you're not going to get an ASD Nest program in Rochester. Or I'm just making up Rochester. I have no idea what they do there. But I can think there could be some circumstances in which there's not a direct, program that's the equivalent in New York City, or vice versa. But they should be providing you with a comparable program immediately. And in most cases, you would think that would be the same program if it's part of the New York State regulations continuum. Okay. All right. Thanks to everybody who took the poll. Any other questions, Ross, or are we good?
Not seeing any, but maybe we can stick around for like a minute or two more just in case folks have some.
Okay, we can stop the recording, I think.